PKK's leader calling for ceasefire, what would then be the relevance of SDF and what would be the aspirational statehood of Kurdistan?
Now, in my opinion, the PKK will not go away. At least the idea of it. They might change their names, they might drop their weapons, they might bury their weapons, but the idea will be there. So same for SDF, Syria. So it will always be there. This is a period of unknown, so we cannot really predict what will happen. It will depend on many unknowns, many variables. The support of US, for example, what's happening even in Gaza has a lot to do with what might happen in the region.
So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is watching it on YouTube. And my name is Dr. Shubda Chaudhary, and this is Middle East Insights platform. Today, we have a very, very esteemed guest with us. His name is Professor Hakan Özoğlu. He is currently the Director of Middle Eastern Studies at University of Central Florida, and all of you should know where Florida is. His research interests include Kurdish identity and nationalism, emergence of modern Turkey, Turkish-American relations during the and after First World War, the power struggle in the early Turkish Republic. He is author of 3 monographs, Kurdish Notables and the Ottoman State, published in 2004, From Caliphate to Secular State in 2011, The Decline of Ottoman Empire and the Rise of Turkish Republic, Observations of an American Diplomat, 2021. His publications were translated in 5 languages. In addition, his interviews and essays has appeared in many international media outlets, including New York Times, Orlando Sentinel, Chicago Tribune, PBS Chicago. He is also the recipient of 2017-2018 Fulbright Core Fellowship. Today, we are going to discuss a very important topic that really shocked everyone who has been following what is happening or who understands the Kurdish identity. It is on 27th of February when the imprisoned leader of Kurdish nationalism, Abdullah Öcalan, basically said that there should be a ceasefire with the Turkish Republic. So today's topic that we are going to discuss is PKK's ceasefire with Turkey, prospects for peace or a tactical pause. So with this, sir, I would like to formally welcome you to our platform. And we really thank you for the privilege of your time. So my first question is, in a very simple way, because we have students watching it who do not know exactly who or what Kurds are. So can you, in a very simple way, explain it to them?
Yes, that's the question that when I was writing my PhD dissertation in the early 90s, my dissertation advisor asked when I said I want to write about Kurdish identity and Kurdish nationalism. He said, who are the Kurds? It's actually a big question. Who are the Turks? Who are the Arabs? This is a question that I puzzled in my first book. In a theoretical level, what makes a person a Kurd? What are the stages of identity formation? Is it fixed or is it fluid? So my conclusion is that it is very fluid, not just Kurdish identity, but any identity that we can think of in the 21st century. So in the 16th century, what Kurd meant is quite different than in the 21st century. And it's very fluid and it evolves. For that, even in the 21st century, depending on who you ask who the Kurd is, you would get a different answers based on their experiences, based on the political and religious environment that they are. I know that the answer should be very straightforward, but actually it is not. It is very important to understand this because identity formation depends on many external factors. But in a nutshell, what we can say is that the first time the word Kurd appeared in historical records go back to almost, I would say, the rise of Islam, when the Arab travelers encounter tribes in a place that don't speak the language that they know. So in tribal areas, the mountainous areas of present day southeastern Turkey and northwestern Iran, that area, when they encounter tribes that they don't recognize their language, I argued that the name Kurd was given to them by Arabs. So they speak a language which is not Persian, which is not Turkish or Arabic that they could recognize, and they call them Kurd. In the 21st century, again, language is one of language and territory are the two major, I would say, two major areas that the Kurdish identity derives its authority from. That is to say, the blurry picture of a territory that is called Kurdistan and the language, which is not Turkish, although it's related to Persian, but it is not Persian or Arabic. The biggest problem with this is that there are a lot of intermarriages. So, and there are many Kurds, or one can consider Kurds, that don't speak Kurdish, but they're still coming from the same ancestry. If I confuse you enough, I would say that who the Kurd is exactly the same as who the Turk is. It's very confused. The biggest problem or obstacle for the Kurdish identity is that they don't have a state of their own to impose a unified Kurdish identity. So they are in different countries. They are resided in Iran, in Turkey, in Syria, and in Iraq, obviously. And since they don't have a so-called a national education, which is a national, in a sense, national education is national brainwashing. They're programming you who you are. And since they lack that kind of centralized structure in education, it would depend on who you ask who the Kurd is. But we can say that those who associate themselves coming from a certain region that is called Kurdistan, and those who, at least in the family, speak Kurdish, can be considered as Kurds. Because of this, if you ask a total number of who the Kurds are, the Kurdish population in the world at the present, definitions would, or the number would vary from 50 million to 20 million. It's a huge variation. But what we can say is that Kurds are the third largest ethnic group, whatever the definition of ethnicity you might use, in the Middle East.
And what is
one of the largest that don't have a state of their own?
Yeah, and the diaspora is also well grown or well developed in Europe, as far as I know. In various
Yes, in
countries,
Europe
yeah.
there is a sizable Kurdish community, and since they are free from the state pressures of Iran, Turkey, and Iraq and Syria, they develop almost a common identity, if you ask. But again, I can argue against it, but that's not the subject of this talk.
And so, what religion basically is it? Sunni Islam that they practice, or have there
A
been
great
changes?
a great majority of them practice Sunni Islam, but there are some Shiite groups too, which are the minority. But overwhelmingly, a great majority of them are Sunni Islam that were converted when the Arabs invaded in the 7th century the territories that they resided in. And like the Turks, Kurds were enlisted in these Arab armies to spread of Islam in exchange for recognition of their tribal rights and authorities.
So, in simple terms, that is how the Ottoman Empire, for example, if we talk about the relationship between Ottoman Empire and the Kurdish population, how was that navigated during those times?
It depends. When the Ottoman Empire was a major empire in the Middle East. So they were governing different groups, linguistic groups, ethnic groups, religious groups. So in order to navigate and insert their authority, they were very decentralized. So they would give authority to the local leaders in Lebanon, for example, especially in the areas that is very hard for their armies to occupy. They would give authority to the local leaders. But they had the power to replace these leaders. Usually, it was a lot cheaper for the Ottoman central administration as opposed to appointing a governor to govern it, bestow an authority to a very strong Kurdish tribal leader, and then govern those territories accordingly. Now, in the 16th century, especially in the 16th century onwards, the interaction, then the major enemy in the east for the Ottoman Empire, the Sunni Ottoman Empire, was the Shiite Safavid Empire of Iran. But the Kurds were located in between two empires. The greatest negotiating power for the Kurds throughout history, even now, even in the present, was that location, because they were able to switch their loyalty from one major empire to another one to get concessions. So knowing that, the Ottoman Empire bestowed a major Kurdish emirates or tribal confederacies a huge authority. They give them territories that they can govern. All they wanted is a little tax, not much. But when they fight against the enemy, i.e., the Safavid Empire, they would supply them with military force, soldiers. So in that sense, the Ottoman Empire was not unique. The Safavids would do the same thing. So we know one Kurdish emirate, for example, switching their loyalty back and forth from Ottomans to Safavids and Safavids to Ottoman empires. This is very important because this pattern still repeats itself at the present with the PKK, with the Kurds in the Middle East. As opposed to major empires, they switch their loyalties or at least negotiate with external powerful state structures like United States or Russia in that sense. But this is a pattern that repeats itself, and this is the only negotiating power that the Kurds have.
And
that
is also the negotiation or the art of being flexible is necessary in today's real politics when everything is so chaotic and transient in its course. So when we talk about Abdullah Öcalan, he has been imprisoned in the Imrali Island, and along with him, many PKK leaders have been imprisoned. It is almost like after 40 decades when a proper ceasefire agreement is in the process. Why do you think the timing of it is important?
This is $1 million question. We can only speculate. It seems that the borders, there's an upheaval in the entire Middle East, in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria. The borders that are arbitrarily drawn after World War I are being challenged now by the political realities of the region. Not to mention, in the past, Ottomans and Safavids were going back and forth, but now the external powers are in there. You have the Western powers with imperialistic designs. You name it, even China has presence and negotiations with these people. We know that there are major shifts are about to happen in terms of perhaps the political borders or regime changes and things like that. So seeing this, Turkey is considering positioning themselves accordingly, that at least they can secure the loyalty of the Kurds, and then when the time comes for negotiations in the international arena, they would have the Kurds on their side, at least the majority of them. How likely it is up in the air. So I am a historian. I try to look at the events on the ground in a historical context. When I watch TV, CNN and the likes, I see the authorities come and make predictions for the future. I say that people have to take these interpretations with a grain of salt, because no one can predict the future. There are many unknowns that even the major governments don't know. People think that there is a scripted future that is dictated by the Western powers. I do not believe in that, because human nature is not predictable. We don't know what is awaiting us. Let me give you one example. Imagine a huge earthquake, which this area is very prone to and they're expecting. That would change the entire plans. So to make predictions about the future is a frivolous attempt. So what we can do is we can consider the possibilities and position themselves accordingly. So this is what the current Turkish government is trying to do. How honest they are to give all these rights to the Kurds is up in the air. My personal judgment, it's just a personal judgment, it might be wrong, is that neither side is honest. This is an opportunity that they see in real politics, and tomorrow things in the ground would change and they switch. This is not the first time the PKK declared ceasefire. This is the third time, actually, and it didn't go further. As I said, even the Turkish government and the Kurds or the PKK are honest in their attempts. There are also these external powers that can interject themselves for their own benefits to block it. So, as a historian, I think what I can say is that history is in humanities as a discipline. It's not a science. Since it's not a science, we cannot predict. There's no pattern that we can create and know what the result is, or will be. But history helps us to understand the present, not predict the future. So.
And I agree with you. There was a time when I believe that the Western powers were ubiquitous in terms of various kinds of military industrial complexes and the deep state or maybe the espionage. But over the period of time, the friction between the people versus the governments, be it in any country, that is increasing over the period of time. And especially Middle East, because there are so many differences in terms of that is the beauty of it also. And there are so many minorities, there are so many different identities, which you said are fluid. It is definitely very difficult to predict. And that brings me, sir, to the next question that historically, this entire idea of Kurdistan is how did it start? And when did it start?
For that, again, I looked at the historical records to see when was the first time the word Kurdistan was used and who used it. I went back to the Seljuk empires in the 12th century. There is an area called Kurdistan. So as early as 12th century, the not only geographical expression, but a province of Kurdistan was created by a huge empire. Seljuks are also a major empire that predates the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire also created administrative jumbo size administrative unit called it Kurdistan. Not very many people knew this until the present in Turkey, and then even the word Kurd was forbidden and Kurdistan was considered a crime. But Kurdistan as an administrative unit, a governorate, was created in the Ottoman Empire, 1846 till 1847, I think, in the mid-19th century. And the territories, but the creation of Kurdistan by the Ottoman state is not to give Kurds a land, but actually it was to establish an authority over the Kurdish tribes that could be unruly. So this was a super governorate that's larger than the governorate of Iraq. I mean, Baghdad, there was no Iraq then. Baghdad and many other places in that area. And the governor of this region was given almost double the salary. So it was a very important province that was created administratively. But it didn't last very long. And one of the major reasons also for the Ottoman Empire is to slow down the Russian expansion towards south. It didn't last long. The Ottoman Empire replaced the name as Diyarbakir. For some reason, we don't know why they took the word Kurdistan out, because that was not a threat for the Ottoman Empire. But they replaced it. The borders of what they call Kurdistan, we don't have the exact map, but we know that the combination of certain provinces to a jumbo administrative unit matches what the Kurds today call Kurdistan. The regions that the Kurds today refer to as Kurdistan. Now, mind you, that since it's not at the present, it is, other than in Iraq, used as a geographical expression, but the borders of it overlaps with competing nationalist groups like Armenians. They claim for Greater Armenia, or the Turks or Iranians. So for that reason, We don't have the exact borders that we can see. When you Google it, you will get a map that is actually drawn by at least the variations of the CIA map that in the early 20th century they draw. So people have that idea. In my first book about the Kurds, I actually have one book on the Kurds, but that book, I also look at the Kurdistan maps in history and see how it changed. Where the Kurdistan, again, depending on who draws this map and the political realities of the time period, also changes. There is one, for example, that excludes Lake Van area in southeastern part of Turkey. So to give room for the Armenians, for their Armenian state. One map has a little sliver of extension that ends in the Mediterranean Sea, so that in World War One, if Kurdistan is created according to Wilson principles, there was an idea. So the map also have an opening to the sea, so that's very important. So the people who live in those areas were also considered Kurds. So the Kurdistan, even the idea of Kurdistan, the borders of it, at least we know the heartland, but the borders of it shifts. This is the evolution of the idea of Kurdistan. There are more Kurds now living outside of these territories that historically being called Kurdistan than they are living in those territories.
Yeah, this is what I heard from a few of the Kurds who said that we have 5 different states, like it's Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and also Europe, in various dimensions. So that is the diaspora, and the diaspora that the parents or grandparents migrated decades before. And what was the major economic activity in a simpler way to understand how the survival of Kurds was retained? Like, for example, today in Syria, the Syrian oil and gas region is mostly inhabited by the Syrian Kurds. So that is a major pipeline, economic pipeline for them. But at the same time, there's black market. But what was the economic activity for them before oil was or natural gas was explored? Or was it fishing or pearl fishing or working at the ports, if any?
Animal husbandry in the 19th century. Until the 19th century, it was they're raising cattle, sheep, and still today, those who live in those areas. Other than, of course, the control of oil in Iraq, for example, the pipelines, that's new, 100 years or so. But the areas, especially in Iraq, where the Kurds are located, in Turkey there is no oil. There are other minerals, but the majority of oil comes in the Middle East, in Iraq, the northern Iraq, where the Kurds are, and in Syria. So this is a blessing, also a curse. If you have that kind of oil, there are a lot of interest in those areas to control it. Turkey, for example, is dying to have those areas under their control. There are many territorial claims for it. But without these oil reserves, Iraq might survive because Iraq has also oil in the south. But Syrian Kurds, for example, that would be a major block for them. But at the same time, in Syria, the new regime, HTS, needs that money. They don't have any money. So the resources in Syria, that will be a next area to look at. We know in Syria today there are a lot of very troubled regions, especially in the Shiite Alawite areas in the Mediterranean coastal towns. But next would be probably the Kurdish areas. And for that reason, the Kurds are very, these are all connected. So the Kurds in Syrian area, which are very closely connected to PKK, and at the present there are discussions whether or not Abdullah Öcalan's call for peace also includes the Kurds in Syria. This is an internal issue in Turkey, but also for the world too. But they know that if they drop their weapons or they are somehow incorporated, the way that the HTS, the central regime in the present in Syria, request of them, they could be very vulnerable. And in that sense, I'm not very hopeful that the Kurds in Syria would follow the orders or suggestions, whatever you might call it, Abdullah Öcalan issued from his prison cell.
Yeah, that itself, especially if, and the kind of social, political, or economic power an imprisoned leader has, is limited in terms of someone with more grassroots activism who is comparatively free and out of espionage and state pressures.
Abdullah Öcalan was in prison for a quarter of a century. I mean, many Kurds that I know are suspicious that this is a genuine call, or since he is in prison, he had to follow the, let's say, the orders of the Turkish government, what he wants. So in that sense, and there are different Kurdish groups in Iran too. There are PKK affiliates, but in Syria definitely, because Abdullah Öcalan once several years lived in Syria and created a Kurdish movement there. So the not entirely, but a major portion of Kurdish militants in Syria are closely affiliated to PKK, albeit they have different initials and different names. So, would you really follow an order of an imprisoned leader that is subject to God knows what in prison? Because whatever he says has to go through the Turkish government. If he says something, don't drop your weapons, you're not gonna hear that. But I have little doubt that he wants PKK somehow incorporated into the political system of Turkey, because PKK now realize that it has completed its so-called historic mission of at least creating some kind of national identity of the Kurds and making the issue an international issue. Although it's not just the PKK that did this, the region is always in turmoil, and Kurds have always been tapped into by the British. Even after World War II, we know that Israel even had negotiations with them. So at the present, we're just waiting to see what next major event take place. This current slaughters of Alawites in Syria also has some effect of what would happen in the future too.
Yeah, that definitely would. In fact, that is why Jalani or Ahmad al-Shara gave a notice yesterday that everyone should stop filming the brutality.
It's too late. There's more than enough. Yeah, it's too late. Although we have to be careful.
Yeah.
In the age of AI, how these things can be manipulated, created, abused. So, but there's little doubt, because we know from people on the ground reporting that there are major massacres taking place against the civilians, and the numbers vary. I've heard 1,000 to 20,000, somewhere in between. So you name it. As you know, the first casualty of war is the truth. So we will never know. Yes, they want them not to be, but there are satellites. There are many things. This can't be hidden.
And definitely when the bounty on his head was lifted, but then if the sanctions against Syria are not lifted in a timely manner, then it doesn't
Yes.
really make sense for the survival of Jalani and his comrades that he has called for.
True, but I mean, we're thinking that Golani is in control of all factions of these militia. So there are many people. And again, the area is open to who knows it's not sent by the Turks? Who knows it's these people are actually, I don't know, CIA agents or work for Israel or anything. I mean, I know these are all conspiracy theories, but anything is possible. What we know is that Gulani doesn't have the control of the entire militia with the weapons that are fighting in his behalf, because he knows that he even put a suit on to look good to the Westerners. This definitely goes against his authority.
And
it will change some dynamics in the region.
It will, and specifically, what I have understood from Golani is that he's like a chameleon. He's associated and has been associated with so many identities, like Islamist movements in the past, and has always switched from one to the other.
Yeah.
So that kind of pattern cannot be stopped if that is the nature.
True.
And the next thing which I've also noticed is that Ahmad al-Sharra is called Golani because, his association with Golan Heights. And now Israel wants to, in the name of protecting the Druze community, take over, though they are very close to Damascus. At the same time, Turkey is now shipping in armaments to Syria. The entire fragility of the geopolitical landscape is divided because of local divisions, regional divisions, and international divisions that are all working side by side.
You're absolutely right. So, there are secret negotiations that one doesn't know what the other does. Like in World War One, Sykes-Picot agreement was secret. So God knows what kind of agreements between them. We're not privy to these information, and they don't even know what's happening. So everyone is in alert. They know an earthquake is coming. Not the real earthquake, but political earthquake is coming, and they think they're trying to do as best as they can. So we can see this also. PKK is trying to take a position for what is to come. There is a calm, or there was a calm until this week in Syria, in the region, but everybody knows that Iran is a target for Western powers and Israel. So they don't know how Iran react to these things, how destabilize the region could be. The region is already destabilized. It started with the first Gulf War, actually, but the removal of Saddam changed everything, all the dynamics, and the dust has not settled. I would say that it actually initiates from World War One. World War II is the continuation of it, and then what's happening today is also one can make connection to World War One and the mistakes that were committed, and of course the idea of nationalism. I can safely state that nationalism is did the biggest harm to the region. Not only Middle East, but different parts of the world too, because these regions are multi-ethnic, multi-religious areas, territories, and if you cannot assimilate these people, you're always bound to have some kind of conflict. It will flare.
Yeah.
And when there's a major shift like this, many innocent people will pay with their lives because of the idea of nationalism that was imposed on them from one group another.
Yeah, no, that is true, even in the South Asian context, because there have been a lot of studies, empirical studies done by Indian scholars, Latin American scholars, that how the nation state itself does not do justice. In fact, state nation is a better paradigm to follow. But one of our members is asking a question, sir. Anurag is asking that could you please explain the differences as well as dynamics between various Kurdish organizations such as PKK, Kurdistan, Democratic Party, PJAK, SDF, and how these fissures were exploited by Iran, Turkey, Iraq, US, Russia, and themselves?
The PJAK is in Turkey at least considered as the Iranian arm of the PKK. Now, the PKK and the Barzani groups in Iraq are two very internationally known groups. Kurdistan Democratic Party, I mean, in Iraq. A very long time, the dynamic between the PKK and KDP, Kurdistan Democratic Party, were hostile. Turkey always negotiates with the KDP historically, and KDP always, again, being in the borderland, even during Saddam time, against their rival groups in Iraq, they would basically side with the central Baghdad government. Same against the PKK, KDP, long time sided with the Turkish government because Turkish government provided them economic help and protection. So PKK in that sense was not in friendly terms with KDP. Although now the group, the Kurds in Turkey, when they were negotiating, although they don't like the word negotiation, they call it dictation, the Turkish state, I mean, they talked to Abdullah Öcalan, and after that they went directly to Iraq, talked to Barzani family, to KDP, to get the blessing of that group. They are major groups. So PJAK is the Iranian arm of it. SDF is basically, I would say, as much, if not more, PKK than PJAK in Syria. I hope I answered the question.
And why does US always use the Kurds as a bait? Sometimes, they have a very empowering relationship. Other times they are just abandoned. Why this to and fro?
Well, I mean, it's not just the US. As I said, the Turks used it, Iranians used it. Iranians used the KDP, for example, against Saddam.
Yeah.
And Saddam used chemical weapons, right? I mean, they use the problem again with the Kurds in the region is that they have to side with an external power. They don't have the authority of their own, at least to fight against these established militarily 10 million times stronger states. But the problem is that if you do that, you depend heavily on their goodwill.
Yeah.
What happens is that if Iran and Saddam in the 80s agreed on a term, then the Kurds are the ones that are sold out and Saddam bombed them. Same in the first Gulf War. Father Bush asked them to revolt. And then they revolted, and Father Bush agreed with the central government that they should not have their own state, and the Turkey too. And they were left, they were bombed and killed by helicopters. The Anfal genocide in Iraq. Same for Israel. So this is what I am thinking. Again, this is not a fact, but my opinion is that there are negotiations by the Kurds, let's say with Israel or the United States. But these outside states also negotiate with Turkey, and Iraqi central government. Kurds don't have enough to give to these imperialist powers, so to speak. So Turkey can provide more. So if the Kurds say, okay, we're going to have you a base here, and then you're going to do this and that, Turks say, okay, we can do this plus something extra. So in that sense, of course, the Kurds are the ones that are always left out in the cold. This is unfortunate, mainly because it's geography. I mean, geography is a very determining factor for the Kurds. They cannot unite, create a unified front because of the mountainous region, historically speaking. But at the same time, now they are divided into major countries in the region, and but they're hoping that this major shift that's happening, the earthquake, when the dust settles, they will have room of a state of their own, starting from perhaps an autonomous region in Syria, and then and grow from there. So paranoid of that, the central governments of Turkey, for example, is trying to block that attempt, thinking that would end up incorporating the Kurds in Turkey. But there are many issues with that, because even Abdullah Öcalan doesn't want an independent Kurdistan now, because independent Kurdistan cannot sustain itself. It could be heavily dependent upon external help. And if you create an independent Kurdistan against the wishes of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, then you're surrounded by the enemies. How can be protected by United States forever?
Yeah.
So it's better, they're thinking, that to integrate and have more democratic rights within the societies that they live in, and this idea of nationalism go down a little, that these people would be part of the citizens of a modern state, they would settle with that. So the idea of nationalism is fading, but it is so slowly fading, and it would take several generations that we can get rid of nationalism. My fear is that it could be replaced by something even more volatile, but I don't think we'll live to see that.
I believe that, one of the reasons why there's a very slow fading of the idea of nationalism is also because of the emergence of ultra-right powers in most of the countries. And the more ultra-right conservative powers or parties get into power, then the more difficult it is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it is a cycle.
Yeah.
It will change. It will do its damage, as we see during World War II. We see these populist leaders emerging throughout the world, not just in the region.
Yeah.
They collect the vote. They use democracy as a tool to come to power and stay in power. And that they change the dynamics of elections so that they can stay in power. But my understanding is that their position is not sustainable. They cannot last long. People will realize that this populism actually is not a good prescription for the sickness of today's societies. But until they realize that, it will do some damage, and ultranationalism will create anti-immigrants policies that is happening in the United States, in Turkey, and God knows anywhere else, probably all over the world. I'm not that familiar, but that's the cycle. It's like a horizontal thing. It goes ahead, but at the same time it loops. So this populism and authoritarian leadership that emerges through populism within these so-called democratic societies is the low point of the development. It will pass, but until then, you have to get an umbrella so it won't be soaked to death.
Yeah, that's actually, and the cycle also has financial depression involved in it. So financial depression followed by rise of ultra-conservative, ultra-nationalistic parties in power, followed by the kind of, antithesis of that. And I don't know when the synthesis is going to happen. So
It
it's,
will happen, barring again a major earthquakes, fires, and God knows, planets would clash. It will happen.
yeah,
But you are 100% correct. Economic problems of populations have a lot to do with that.
yeah,
When people are poor, they start blaming, they start looking for people to blame, the immigrants, the imperialists, the unknown threats, and that give ways to rise of this authoritarian leadership, saying that in these hard times, democracy having many voices, we can't take that. So as opposed to distribution of power, they changed their systems to make it a unification of power. So it's basically a soft way of saying I declare my authoritarianism. So
yeah,
as opposed to the parliament, the judiciary, and the executive office try to subordinate the other branches of government, saying that this is way too much. So we will dictate in a much faster fashion some politics that is for the good of the people.
yeah.
But well, history tells us that that's not possible because
Yeah.
now they get corrupt.
Yeah, that is. And so Shrishti, another member of ours, is asking, though we have talked about it, but she's asking that after PKK's leader calling for ceasefire, what would then be the relevance of SDF and what would be the aspirational statehood of Kurdistan?
No, in my opinion, the PKK will not go away.
Yeah,
At least the idea of it. They might change their names, they might drop their weapons, they might bury their weapons, but the idea will be there. So same for SDF in Syria. So it will always be there. Now the this is a period of unknown, so we cannot really predict what will happen. It will depend on many unknowns, many variables. The support of US, for example, um, what's happening even in Gaza has a lot to do with what might happen
yeah,
in the region. Um, what happened in Ukraine has a lot to do with Russian position that would affect how aggressive they will become towards Iran has a lot to do with that. But the Kurds in Syria, in my opinion, will stay, at least try to stay strong to protect themselves against the central government in Syria, and at the same time keep the soldiers, the U.S. soldiers in the region, so that they could have some kind of protection, at least for the time being. We don't know how far or how long U.S. Can stay there, or could be replaced by, let's say, Israel. Uh, but that's everything is up in the air.
yeah. That is right now. IDF itself is finding out who the mole is, and the allegations over Smotrich have cropped up. And then Anurag, that question that you have asked, we have just discussed the answer of that. And also, there was one particular very interesting article that I studied by journalist Sinan Judy, who says that. On 27th of February, when Abdullah Öcalan had read the letter, um, there were two things that happened. That the letter was actually written on 25th of February, and it was then read on 27th of February. The second was also that the recording was done in such a way that there was only selective gatekeeping, so that the audio or the video cannot be shared without the approval of the Turkish state at majority of platforms. And there were three other prisoners along with Abdullah Öcalan. I'm sure I'm pronouncing the names not correctly, but it is Hamili Ildrim, Omer Yahiri Konar, and Vevsi Aktas, who are also there in the photographs that was shared of the ceasefire announcement. So everything also, it feels like a choreographed session.
Of course, it's expectedly so, though. I mean, you have Abdullah Öcalan. Abdullah Öcalan, according to Turkish laws at that time, it was a crime to be punishable by execution. He was not executed. The laws change. He was imprisoned. There's a reason for that. That's in case of a need, they would get some kind of a statement from him like this. It took him 25 years. Well, actually, they tried before, and it didn't work. But I mean, yeah, that's the whole reason. That it is choreographed. Originally, the ultra-nationalist leader, Devlet Bahçeli, in the parliament asked and shocked everyone. This process started like that. That a month ago, he basically asked for the destruction of the Kurdish movement. He asked Abdullah Öcalan come to the Turkish parliament to read it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it changed that he could do perhaps a video conference to be read. And then it changed to that he write it and read it from his own voice. And then it changed to now that the Kurdish parliamentarians would go and get the statement and read it in somewhere else. So, of course, they're closely monitored. There are rumors that the negotiations, again, they don't want to accept negotiations, but no one believes in this Turkish government, started 1 year ago. We don't know what is promised to the Kurds because suddenly it's like a magic wand touched them. They changed their positions 180 degrees. So the opposition in Turkey is puzzled what happened exactly, but there's no way of knowing it at this point. If there's a negotiations that happen or something that happened that we don't know, that they changed their positions 180 degrees. The ultra-nationalists wanted the Kurdish party to be banned a month before, and then the Turkish Constitutional Court disagreed with that, and then this time the Turkish ultra-nationals wanted to shut down the Turkish Constitutional Court too.
Yeah.
From that hardline position, they came to this. Again, we're at the beginning, we talked about this, but we don't know what we don't know, what dynamics they're trying to probably position themselves, what's to come. Both Kurds and the Turkish government to be in a better position. But perhaps they have an idea of what's to come. I would suggest that they are wrong because there's no way of knowing what's to come.
Yeah, no. And with this, I would really thank you for the privilege of your time.